I imagine it's July 2015. You're Eleni, a 68-year-old retired school teacher in Athens. You wake at 4 a.m. because the bank opens at 8, and you need to be near the front of the line. You've been doing this every other day for a week now. The government has imposed capital controls. ATMs dispense only 60 euros per day. Sometimes they run out entirely. You worked for 35 years. You paid into the system every month. You did what you were told. And now you stand in the dark outside a locked bank, clutching your pension book, hoping there's enough in the machine to buy groceries. The European newspapers call this a crisis of Greek irresponsibility, but that's not quite right. Because Eleni didn't design the system, she just believed in it. Here's what nobody told her. The pension she was promised was never actually saved. It was never invested. There was no account with her name on it. Every euro she contributed during her working life was immediately paid out to someone else's retirement. The system assumed that when it was her turn, younger workers would pay for her. But something happened. Greece's birth rate collapsed. Its young people emigrated, and the ratio of workers to retirees went from sustainable to catastrophic in a single generation. Eleni didn't lose her pension to corruption. She lost it to arithmetic. And here's the part that matters. Greece is not special. The mechanism that broke there is ticking inside almost every developed economy on Earth. This is not theory. It's documented history. And once you understand the trap, you can't unsee it. The premise sounds generous. Too generous to criticize. A society decides that its elderly should not starve, that those who worked their entire lives deserve dignity in old age. So it creates a system. Workers pay in, retirees draw out, everyone is protected. This is what most people think is happening, a safety net, a contract, a promise. But that's not how these systems actually work. And let's start with the original design. In 1889, Otto von Bismarck created the first state pension system in Germany. It was a political masterstroke. At the time, socialist movements were gaining power among industrial workers. Bismarck, an aristocratic conservative, needed to diffuse the threat. So he created a government pension that would be funded by contributions from workers and employers. Retire at 70, receive payments until you die. Here's the trick. In 1889, average life expectancy in Germany was approximately 40. Most workers would never collect. The system was designed to look like a benefit while costing almost nothing. It was a political pacifier with an actuarial trapdoor. But then, something changed. People started living longer. Medicine improved, nutrition improved, working conditions improved, and what was designed as a minimal expense became an expanding obligation. The age thresholds stayed roughly the same, but the population living past them doubled, then tripled. The original design assumed most people would die before they became costly. They didn't. The system was never rebuilt. It was patched, over and over. And the patches always moved in one direction. More benefits, more recipients, more promises. To understand why these programs become traps, you need to understand the difference between a funded system and a pay-as-you-go system. A funded system works like this. You pay in, the money is invested, and you draw down your own accumulated capital when you retire. It's your money. It was always your money. If the investment performs poorly, you get less. If it performs well, you get more. But either way, you're consuming what you saved. A pay-as-you-go system works differently. What you pay in this year is paid out this year to current retirees. There's no investment. There's no fund. There's only a continuous transfer from workers to retirees. When it's your turn to retire, you depend entirely on the next generation of workers to pay for you. Think about what this means. If there are 4 workers for every retiree, the burden is light. Each worker pays a quarter of a pension. If there are 2 workers per retiree, each worker pays half. If the ratio drops to 1-to-1, each worker must pay for an entire pension while also supporting themselves. This is where it breaks. Most national pension systems in the developed world, Social Security in the United States, the state pension in the UK, public pensions across Europe, are pay-as-you-go systems. They depend entirely on the ratio of workers to retirees remaining stable or growing. That ratio is not stable. In 1950, the United States had 16 workers for every Social Security recipient. By 1960, it was 5. By 2020, it was 2.8. Current projections suggest it will fall below 2 by the early 2040s. Japan is worse. In 1970, there were 8.5 workers per retiree. By 2020, the ratio was 2.1. By 2050, projections show it approaching 1.3. Italy, Spain, Germany, South Korea. The numbers vary, but the direction is universal. Let that sink in. Every one of these systems was designed in an era of population growth. They assumed there would always be more young people entering the workforce than old people leaving it. That assumption is now mathematically false in nearly every advanced economy on Earth. Now here's where the trap closes. Once a pay-as-you-go system is established, it cannot be undone without someone paying twice. Consider the problem. You're a 45-year-old worker. You have been paying into the system for 20 years. Those contributions didn't go into an account. They went to current retirees. They're gone. If the government decides to transition to a funded system, you now have to save for your own retirement while still paying for the current generation of retirees. You would have to pay twice. This is politically impossible. No government can tell half the workforce that their contributions bought them nothing and they must start over. The backlash would be immediate and overwhelming. So they don't reform. They patch. They raise the retirement age by a year or two. They increase the contribution rate. They cap benefits. They change the inflation adjustment formula. Small adjustments designed to buy time without triggering revolt. But the math keeps getting worse. And here's what makes it a true trap. The longer you wait to reform, the larger the adjustment needed. The larger the adjustment needed, the more politically impossible it becomes. You are always one election cycle away from not the right time. France tried to raise its retirement age in 2023. Millions took to the streets. Garbage piled up. Refineries shut down. The reform barely passed, and it only raised the age from 62 to 64. The underlying math required far more. In the United States, the Social Security trustees issue a report every year. For decades, it has contained the same warning. The trust fund will be depleted, currently projected around 2033, after which the system can only pay approximately 77% of scheduled benefits. The warning is official. It is public. It is ignored. This is the nature of the trap. Everyone can see the problem. No one can solve it without losing power. Let's autopsy Greece. Not because it was unique, but because it went first. By the early 2000s, Greece had one of the most generous pension systems in Europe. Public sector workers could retire after 35 years of service, sometimes in their early 50s. Benefits were high. Contribution rates were insufficient. The gap was funded by government borrowing. For years, this worked. International capital markets were happy to lend. Greece was part of the Eurozone. It had access to cheap money. It could borrow at rates close to Germany's, despite having a fundamentally different economy. Then came 2009. The global financial crisis revealed what had been hidden. Greece's debt was far higher than reported. Its deficit was unsustainable. Its pension obligations were a major driver of both. International creditors, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, other Eurozone governments agreed to provide bailout loans, but only with conditions. Greece had to cut spending. A primary target, pensions. What followed was catastrophic. Pension benefits were cut by 40% or more for some recipients. The retirement age was raised, eligibility rules tightened. A generation of workers who had planned their entire lives around a specific retirement income watched that income disappear. Eleni lost 45% of her pension between 2010 and 2015. She did nothing wrong. She wasn't corrupt. She didn't vote for the politicians who built the system. She was born at the wrong time. The pattern is always the same. The generation that builds the system and benefits from it faces no consequences. The generation that believed in it and paid into it absorbs the collapse. Think about what that means. Japan is another case study, but with a different trajectory. Japan has the oldest population on Earth. Its fertility rate fell below replacement level in the 1970s and has never recovered. By 2020, nearly 29% of the population was over 65. By 2050, projections show this rising above 37%. The pension system is under permanent strain. But Japan did not experience a Greek-style collapse. Why? Because Japan can borrow from its own population. Over 90% of Japanese government debt is held domestically by Japanese banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and households. This means Japan doesn't face a sudden withdrawal of foreign capital. It has time. But time is not a solution. It's a slow burn. To manage the pension burden, Japan has done several things. It has kept interest rates near zero for 3 decades, reducing borrowing costs. T has increased consumption taxes. It has gradually reduced benefit generosity. It has encouraged elderly citizens to continue working into their 70s. And it has accumulated debt. Public debt now exceeds 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. Japan is not solving the pension math. It is delaying it. Every year, the burden grows. Every year, the working age population shrinks. Every year, the solution becomes more expensive. Japan will not collapse suddenly like Greece, but the trap is identical. The only difference is the speed at which it closes. The United States presents a third variation. Social Security was created in 1935. At the time, life expectancy at birth was around 61. The retirement age was set at 65. Most people wouldn't collect for long. Today, life expectancy is approximately 77. People retire at 62, 65, or 67 and often live into their 80s or 90s. What was designed as a few years of support has become a decades-long commitment. But here's the structural issue. Social Security is not just a pension system. It is the largest single expenditure in the federal budget. In 2023, it paid out over $1.3 trillion. Together with Medicare, which funds health care for the elderly, these programs consume roughly half of all federal spending. But here's the structural issue. Social Security is not just a pension system. It is the largest single expenditure in the federal budget. In 2023, it paid out over $1.3 trillion. Together with Medicare, which funds healthcare for the elderly, these programs consume roughly half of all federal spending, and they are growing. The Congressional Budget Office projects that by 2050, spending on Social Security and Medicare alone will exceed all federal revenue. Let that settle for a moment. If current trends continue, the federal government will eventually spend more on elderly benefits than it collects in taxes. Everything else, defense, infrastructure, education, research, would have to be funded by borrowing. This is not a crisis, it's a constraint, and it narrows every year. Some argue that the solution is growth. If the economy grows fast enough, there will be enough wealth to support both workers and retirees. This sounds reasonable, but let's examine it. For growth to solve the demographic imbalance, productivity would need to increase at rates not seen since the post-war boom. Historically, productivity growth in advanced economies has averaged around 1 to 2% per year. To offset the changing worker-to-retiree ratio, you would need sustained growth of 3 to 4% or more. There's no developed economy achieving this. None. The post-war boom was driven by unique conditions. Rebuilding from destruction, pent-up demand, new technologies like electrification and automobiles, a rapidly expanding labor force from women entering the workforce, and the baby boom. Those conditions do not exist today. They cannot be recreated by policy. Growth is not coming to rescue the math. The math is the constraint. Others suggest that immigration can solve the problem. Young immigrants enter the workforce, pay into the system, and restore the ratio. This is partially true. Immigration does improve the worker-to-retiree balance, but the scale required is enormous. To maintain the current worker-to-retiree ratio in Italy, for example, the country would need to accept over 2 million working-age immigrants per year. Germany would need over 3 million. Japan, which accepts almost no immigrants, would need to undergo a complete cultural transformation. And there's a further complication. Immigrants age too. They eventually become retirees themselves. Unless immigration is continuous and ever increasing, it only delays the problem. It doesn't eliminate it. This is not an argument against immigration. It's an observation about mathematics. Immigration is a temporary relief valve, not a permanent solution. Now let's name the real constraint. The trap is political economy. Democratic governments face elections. Retirees vote in high numbers. Any politician who campaigns on reducing pension benefits, raising retirement ages significantly, or cutting health care for the elderly faces a structural disadvantage. The beneficiaries of the current system are concentrated, organized, and motivated. The future taxpayers who will pay the cost are diffuse, young, and often not yet born. This creates an asymmetry. There is always more political gain in expanding benefits and more political cost in reducing them. Even when the math is obvious, the politics are impossible. Every finance minister in the developed world understands this. Every actuarial report says the same thing. Every projection shows the trajectory, and nothing changes. Because reform requires asking current beneficiaries to accept less so that future generations can have anything at all. That's a trade most voters will not accept. Not when the consequences are decades away. Not when someone else can be blamed. That's the trap. Let me show you how this played out in one more case. In 2001, Argentina was in crisis. It had accumulated massive debts, partly driven by pension obligations. When it defaulted, the government converted dollar-denominated pensions into pesos, then devalued the peso. Overnight, retirees lost roughly 70% of their purchasing power. The mechanism was different from Greece. Argentina used currency devaluation. Greece, locked into the euro, couldn't devalue and had to cut benefits directly. But the outcome was identical. Retirees absorbed the loss. In Venezuela, hyperinflation destroyed pension values entirely. A monthly payment that once covered living expenses became worth less than a meal. The form varies. The function does not. When the math becomes unsustainable, someone must pay. And that someone is almost always the person who trusted the system most. Now let's consider what this means for anyone paying into these systems today. A 30-year-old worker in the United States will reach full retirement age around 2060. By that point, on current projections, Social Security will have been insolvent for nearly 3 decades unless reforms are made. What reforms? Benefits could be cut. The retirement age could be raised to 70 or beyond. Contribution rates could increase. High earners could see their benefits means tested away. Some combination of all four. Or the government could fund the gap through borrowing and money creation, eroding the purchasing power of benefits through inflation. You receive the nominal amount promised. It buys less. These are the only options. There are no others. At this point, there are only 3 paths. Higher taxes on workers, lower benefits for retirees, or currency debasement that functionally reduces both. None of them are painless. The deeper pattern is this. Safety nets are built during eras of growth and optimism. They are designed with assumptions baked in: growing populations, rising productivity, stable currencies. When those assumptions fail, the safety net becomes a fiscal anchor. You cannot dismantle it because millions depend on it. You cannot fund it because the math doesn't work. You cannot reform it because the politics forbid it. So you extend, you delay, you borrow, you print, you hope, until you can't. What does this mean for individuals? This is not investment advice, and I won't pretend otherwise. But understanding the system is itself valuable. Those who rely entirely on government safety nets are exposed to political risk. Benefits are not contracts in the legal sense. They are policy choices that can be changed by future legislatures. The Supreme Court ruled in 1960 in Fleming v. Nestor that American workers have no contractual right to Social Security benefits. Congress can reduce or eliminate them at any time. Most people don't know this. They believe they are paying into an account. They believe they have a right to what was promised. They believe the system is solvent. None of these beliefs are entirely true. I'm not predicting collapse. I'm not predicting a specific date. Predictions are easy. Understanding is hard. And what I'm describing is a pattern. It is repeated in multiple countries across multiple decades. It follows the same mechanism every time. It ends the same way. Demographics drive pension math. Pension math becomes politically impossible. Political impossibility leads to delay. Delay leads to larger eventual adjustment. The adjustment is always paid by those who believed in the system. The question isn't if, it's when. And when the adjustment comes, it will be framed as unexpected. A crisis, a shock, something no one could have predicted. But the pattern was always visible. It was in the actuarial tables. It was in the demographic charts. It was in every trustee's report, every IMF warning, every projection from every budget office in the developed world. The information was public. The math was simple. The politics were impossible. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial or investment advice. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The safety nets your parents trusted were designed for a world that no longer exists. The populations are older, the debts are larger, the constraints are tighter, and the solutions are fewer. Most people never see these patterns until they're standing in line at 4 a.m., hoping the ATM still works. This channel exists to study the autopsies before they repeat. If this lens was useful, subscribe. The pattern is already in motion.